Thanks for tuning back in to Liberty Hill Life Groups Online. We're currently working through a study on raising kingdom kids by Dr. Tony Evans. This study is mirroring and intended to be a companion for his videos on RightNow Media. If you don't have a subscription to RightNow Media, please reach out to the church. We'd love to help you get set up. That way you have access to not just this content, but all the other amazing content on RightNow. So we're currently in session 4. And just a quick recap, what we've covered up to this point is how to be intentional and purposeful as parents. And that's a theme that we will be continuing all throughout every session of the study. And then the next week in session 2, we covered setting up useful habits and routines for our kids. And then last week we covered perspective, how there's a God-centered perspective that we can have in the world or a man-centered perspective. And we covered the importance of establishing that God-centered perspective, not just for our children, but for us. So we're going to continue that thought process of perspective and how to improve that this week with environment and how to really set up our home as an environment and an atmosphere that promotes the perspective that we need in not just our children, but ourselves. The atmospheres and environments that our children are in that have an impact and influence on them are numerous. It can be very complicated. There's a lot of things that we can work through and things that they're exposed to that we could discuss, but just to keep things simple and focusing on the family, the parenting aspect, I'd like to look at our homes and what it looks like to make our homes an environment that's conducive for raising our children in a godly way, promoting a God-centered perspective on their lives, and promoting the habits and routines that we've been talking about before. And when I think about a home that's conducive to that, I think about love. I think about one that promotes love, that encourages love, that has a focus on how to interact with each other in a godly, loving way. And one of the big parts of that is not only actively promoting it, but also removing opposition. And there's a lot of things in our home from activities, TV shows, music, games that could potentially be opposing to the other habits and routines that we're encouraging and we're trying to teach in our kids. But one thing that we might not always think about as opposition is ourselves. Sometimes the biggest opposition can be us. So our attitudes and our actions can be major sources of opposition in our homes when it comes to promoting an atmosphere of love. And that's critical for our children. And our children have been the focus of this study so far, and they are still the focus. But right now, for their good, we need to focus on ourselves. We need to look at some of the areas where we may be neglecting our spiritual health. And this is something we all do. We all fall short. We all make mistakes. This is something that we're going to have to continuously deal with as we walk through life. And focusing on our souls and our own spiritual health is something that we need to not just do now, but we have to continue doing. We have to make that a habit. We have to make that a routine. There's lots of great resources out there for that, but you have to do a little bit of self-assessment yourself. You have to see what you need to work on. Maybe reach out to some people that you know closely. Set up a small group and work through this study with them, and you guys confide in each other in a loving, trusting manner, in a way that you can help each other grow and work through some of these areas that you may be neglecting for your own spiritual health. And we also have a fantastic series from Pastor Joe on our YouTube channel called Soul Care. He went through earlier this year where he walks through so many of the key points of opposition that really make dark spots in our souls. And he gives some amazing guidance that lets us walk through those and work through them in a godly way. And for those of you that are married, don't neglect your marriage. But we see in Genesis 2 that it wasn't good for man to be alone. And when man and wife come together, they're one flesh. They're partners. They're meant to be together. They're meant to work together. And whenever we parent, oftentimes it's easy, especially if we have multiple children, and as they get older and schedules get busy, things get a little bit crazy, it's easy to parent in like a man-to-man defense. It's easy to one parent be focused here, one be focused here. I'll deal with this kid, you deal with that kid. And you're working with them and you have the best interests of your children at heart, but you're parenting separately. You're not unified in your parenting approach. And that unification requires you to be together. Take some time together, spend some time focusing on your marriage, have date nights, talk about how you're going to work together as parents and work through these matters, because you have to be unified. You were intended to be unified, and you were intended to parent together. So as we wrap up this week, just like every previous week, we've discussed what we can focus on and what we can work on to improve our instruction to our children, to raise them in a godly way. So as we mentioned before, we want to focus on our spiritual health this week. We want to look at areas that we can grow, that we need to work on to make sure that our souls are spiritually healthy, so that the environments that we set up for our children in our homes mirrors that health. And for those of you that are married, do not neglect your marriage. Take some time with your spouse and discuss the things that we've talked about here. Maybe even look at RightNow Media for some marriage series that might be beneficial for you. Check those out. I think that they would be very helpful. And Dr. Evans, one thing that he mentions this week is in reference to a scripture in Ephesians that we'll look over and read now. It's Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, where Paul says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother." A lot of times we want to stop there and point that out to our kids and say, see, right here, the Apostle Paul says that you have to obey me. But then Paul goes on a little bit in verse 4, where he says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children in anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." So that one statement is something that I'd like us to focus on in our homes this week. We need to focus on instruction, and we need to focus on discipline. But in doing that, just like Paul says, do not provoke your children to anger. And a lot of times, even if we're doing discipline and instruction well, our children aren't going to be happy about that. They're going to get angry. And although we need to focus on doing those things in love, that's not specifically what Paul's talking about here. The word he uses, provoke. That's intentional. That means doing something in a way that we're intentionally driving our kids to anger, not in a method of loving them or helping them to grow, but actually provoking them to anger. And that's something that does not promote a healthy home. It does not promote a home that's focused on love. So let's work on our spiritual health, our marriage health, and how we can deliver godly discipline and instruction to our kids in a way that promotes that love this week. So hop over to RightNow Media, check out session 4 on Dr. Evans' Raising Kingdom Kids. It's called Cultivating a Kingdom. And come back and join us here next week for session 5. Thank you.